Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the PMSIG. This is our third SIG and it's turning out to be surprisingly popular. I think there were 60, 65 of us who registered for tonight. So that's pretty encouraging for only 3 weeks or 3 events, I mean. The event's sponsored by CoreDev. If you're not familiar with CoreDev, we also host the QA SIG for quality assurance if you're interested in that. So that's qasig.org. And then there's also pmsig.org if you want to check out sites. But CoreDev does managed services, technical services, primarily testing, but also PM stuff and technical writing. And we also do staffing and placement work and a little bit of development here and there. So just so you have an idea of where we're coming from. And once we're comfortable with getting together again, we'll host the meeting over at our Seattle headquarters, and we can all have pizza and beer and soft drinks. It's always free. So it's a fun time to get together and do a little networking and make new friends. And we'll continue to share everything on Zoom for sure, because it makes it really easy for anyone to join from anywhere. And it's been really cool that it's become a multi-state and sometimes international event. So we're very fortunate to have our celebrity host and coordinator, Jonathan Bach. We hope you enjoyed tonight's talk and you find the events compelling enough to keep coming back and spread the word. So take her away, John.
Awesome, thank you, Joe. I am John. I'm a program manager at eBay and have been for 10 years. That's why I met tonight's speaker. As Joe mentioned, I'm kind of the intellectual host of PMSIG, which we do every even month, and QASIG is every odd month. I had a chance to meet Nicole years ago and was just impressed at her ideas and organization and innovations that she had as a product manager. So I'm always on the lookout for speakers and asked Nicole if she would be willing to present a topic. And of course, she agreed, and here she is. And what I didn't know about Nicole, though, was that she's got 17 years as an adjunct professor, as well as being a product manager. And tonight, she's going to share what she calls best practices, as you've heard that many times before, perhaps in talks. But in this case, key topics include like working together, managing and prioritizing work, customer discovery, and getting stories ready, measuring how and what we work on, and communications. And so I'm eager to see what she has to share with all of us, of course. And if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box, and I will be a moderator at the end when Nicole is ready to open it up for questions. So don't be shy. And without further ado, let me hand it over to Nicole Birdsall and let her tell us about best practices for product managers to build highly effective teams.
Thanks so much, John. Hello, everyone. First and foremost, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be here and to share off some of my best practices. And I know that you've heard that term quite a bit. These are my best practices. I'm hoping that you'll get at least one tip or tool out of this that will help improve your own team. So over the years, I've collected a lot of different ideas and thoughts and tools and tips, and that's what I'm sharing off with you tonight. Before I begin, I did want to introduce myself. So a little bit about my professional career. I've been a product manager for 20 plus years, which is hard to believe. I started off as a software engineer. I didn't stay there very long, just a couple of years, and then I moved into product management. I've done product management in a range of companies, from startups to enterprise companies. The big enterprise companies were eBay, Experian, and I'm now with PayPal. My current role is as a distinguished senior product manager for pricing. And ultimately that just means I work on the pricing platform as one of their product managers. I'm at PayPal, and actually the picture on the side was the only picture I had of our office. That is my daughter with her best friend on a tour of PayPal. So, all right, academic. So as John mentioned, I'm also a professor. I have a few degrees. First one is a Bachelor's of Science in Operations Management and Information Systems. The second one is a MBA. I concentrated in marketing. And then I also went back and get a master's degree in psychology, specifically in industrial and organizational psychology. So basically how organizations work and how specifically like group dynamics is incredibly helpful. It's the one degree I actually can say I use every single day. And then I'm actually working on my next degree. I don't know if I'll ever stop. I think I have a bad habit of always wanting to learn. My husband says I'll never stop being a student, and it's true. I went straight from my master's in psychology off to my doctorate. So I'm working on my doctorate in business. My area of focus is the convergence of cyberpsychology. If you've not heard that term before, it is a discipline within the psychology realm. And it's basically how we interact with our devices and how our devices have impacted our human behavior. A little different than HCI. HCI actually falls within that, but cyberpsychology is kind of looking at how the devices are changing our own human behavior. And then also that convergence of consumer behavior. So how do we use our devices in the consumer world? How do we spend our money? How do we shop, etc. So that is my area of education. As an academic career, this is my next career. At some point in my life, I will go into full-time as a full-time professor. Right now I'm an adjunct. I've been an adjunct professor for actually a little bit more than 17 years. I think I'm 17 in a semester. I am currently a senior adjunct professor at Golden Gate University. I teach all formats, in-person, asynchronous, and synchronous. And I teach e-commerce is my primary subject. I also teach digital marketing and marketing management. A little bit about my personal life, my family. So Ryan, my husband, Jacqueline, my daughter, and then our 4 dogs, Peyton, Ronick, Lauren, and Bogey. I love running, hiking, and biking. I also volunteer on the board of directors for the California Miniature Schnauzer Rescue. We do a lot of volunteer work with dog rescue organizations. That's our primary. And then hobbies, renovating the house that you see in the back on my virtual background. So renovating a Victorian home, which we purchased 3 years ago, and stained glassing, which I've recently learned in the last couple of years. So that's a little bit about me. I have some ways to contact me. So I have this also at the very end, so you can grab them as well. So if you want to take a quick screenshot. I do have a website. You're welcome to go on there. And there's some things on here that I will point out that are also on my website. So you're welcome to go grab them. And then you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, as well as contact me via email if you'd like. So if you have any questions afterwards or just want to run through some ideas, I'm always open to have a chat. So with that, the agenda. So I pulled together just some, like I mentioned before, kind of the things that I have been using and have evolved over my years of experience at product management. I kind of bucketed them into these 4 buckets. So first is working together. So how do we work together? Some tips and tricks for you guys. Hopefully they'll be helpful for you. How we manage our work, which is incredibly important as a product manager. That includes prioritization. Measuring what we do and how we do it. So I've got some measurements for you that you may be interested in. And then also, how do we communicate out to other various parts of our organization or stakeholders? So those are the buckets I'll go through. A lot of, some of the bits of information come from, basic agile practices and specifically Scrum, but I've also wanted to highlight some of the things that my teams and I have done that we found very helpful, and hopefully you will too. So under working together, I'm going to cover working agreements. I'm also going to cover ceremonies, whether they're across teams or within our team. The first one is working agreements. I find, at least in my experience, that most people don't put a lot of stock into these. I think it's a great way of getting the team together to start talking about how you want to work together. Having a conversation before conflict arises and how you want to deal with that can be very helpful. I would also argue from a psychology perspective, it's great to have a working agreement with any relationship that you may have, either personal or professional. Understanding how to deal with whether it's conflict or how to, what the processes and norms are, and actually having a discussion with those as you get together. It's a great way to pull a team together and start talking about the norms that you want to have and the behaviors and the culture that you want to cultivate. So first and foremost, I strongly agree of having a working agreement. I also tell my students in group projects the first assignment that they have is a working agreement. I make them talk about how they want to work together, what their goals are, what type of culture that they want to run within their own team. So I do this within my professional career as well. And I can't strongly suggest this enough, is just to have one. But you want to make sure that it's published too. So one of the things that my team and I like to do is we like to make sure it's on our Confluence page or our wiki page. So it's published and we can go to it. And from time to time, and specifically in our retrospectives, we actually bring this up. So we can go back and reflect on our working agreement. And this is where we kind of remind ourselves and our team also likes to remind each other of the types of behaviors that we want to have as a team and some of the practices we want to have. For example, in our working agreement, one of the things they like to call me out on is our definition of ratty, making sure that their stories and epics are clear for them so they know what they need to be working on. So they like to remind me of that particular part in our agreement. So that's just one of those things that you can have in a working agreement. And we like to, at least in my teams, we like to call out different cultural elements that we're looking to. We also like to call out conflict management and how to deal with that. Ways of communicating is also very important. Revisit the working agreement. If there's one thing in life that we all know is true and always happening is change. So as your team evolves, you want to be looking at that working agreement and keep going back to it and having those conversations. My team typically pulls up, at least this is what I've found in my experience, is pulling up that working agreement, really talking it through at least every other month or a quarter. Where we actually go through it and revise it. And we like to pull it up in our retrospectives as we talk through what worked and what didn't work. And lots of times we're actually changing our working agreement because something that we thought was going to work didn't quite work as well as we thought. So we change it and keep working and hopefully improve. And then also have fun. One of my favorite teams was they decided to put some fun elements in the working agreement. And one of the ones that was a big pet peeve within the team is people being late for meetings. And it was really bad in this particular team. So they decided to, actually, they all agreed to charge $1 a minute for missing the meeting. So if you were late for a meeting, you owed $1 a minute. That was this particular team wanted to do. They put it in a jar, and at the end of the week, we all went to lunch together as a team with that money. So the first couple of weeks, we had a lot of money, and after that, we had zero money, but everyone was on time. So it worked really well. We had a lot of fun, and actually that team still gets together about once a quarter, at least before shelter in place. Got together about once a quarter, and we haven't actually worked in the same company for 6 years. So that tells you something about how that team really bonded. And we like to have some interesting fun challenges in there as well. So that's one thing and when you're forming a new team, I highly recommend pulling this out as a kind of a team activity. It gets people talking and kind of really bonds your team together. So that is one of my suggestions. And a tip, I mentioned conflict management. I strongly encourage talking through how to deal with conflict. In our human psychology, we do not like conflict, and most times we like to avoid it because it's uncomfortable. Having a way of dealing with conflict and how you want to resolve it as a team, talking about it before it happens usually can be very helpful. So a couple things that my team has used, we had rules of engagement. So one of my teams actually had a problem with people talking over each other. So we decided on a couple of different things. One is that one speaker at a time, and we actually had a baton. It was like a stick or something that we just passed around, and one of my other teams passed around a trophy. for who was able to talk at that time, because we just were in bad practice of being so passionate and so excited that we would jump in and we would forget that we're actually interrupting someone. We also wanted to make sure that everyone has a voice at the table. So that is really important, that everyone feels like they have a voice. So having rules of engagement, how do you address everyone, especially the ones who might be quiet? And like myself, an introvert, you might not realize that, but I am an actual very, very strong introvert, which I've worked years of trying to get over my shyness, which I think I'm over now, but anyway, it's really important that everyone has that voice. So if there's ways that you can bring that in, one of the things that my team did is we actually passed that baton around and everyone had to speak. So we had a question or brainstorming an idea and we would all go around the room and speak. And also practicing active listening, which is not necessarily easy for us to do sometimes, is to truly listen to someone and be engaged. One of my teams had a hard time with this as well. And what they would do is they would always be on their computer. So they were always multitasking. So one of the things that we had is a rule of no computers in our meeting room. And that was a way of making sure that we are truly present and we are truly being good listeners for one another. The other tip that I have with conflict resolution, which has helped quite a bit on all of my teams, voting. Having the ability to vote, and everyone has a say naturally if everyone gets a vote. There's a couple of different ways that we've used for voting that I found to be very helpful. One is Roman voting. If you're not familiar with Roman voting, you probably are, but maybe not with the term. It's either a thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs in the middle. And the trick to that is thumbs up and thumbs down are pretty easy to understand. Yes or no. If the thumbs in the middle means I will accept and support the decision of the team. And that is a really important distinction. It's not saying I'm not going to vote. It's saying I will support whatever the team wants to vote to. So that was a very important distinction for several of my teams. Is a very fast way to get past something that's conflicting within the team. One of my teams probably used it 4 or 5 times within one given meeting. So this can be very effective and it just helps you move on. Dot voting, you probably are familiar with this. It's everyone gets a certain amount of dots. Usually they're stickers that are little dots. And you go around and you put so many, like everyone gets a certain set of dots and you basically go around and you put your dots, whether all on one vote or on multiple votes. So if you feel strongly about one particular outcome, you put all your dots on that. Otherwise, you'll spread them out. So this is really helpful, especially if you're doing any type of prioritization exercise. You can use this with stakeholders. I use this with a group of stakeholders who are exceptionally passionate and usually conflicting. And so what I did is I gave them all a set amount of dots, typically 3 to 5, and they got to vote on their favorite feature. And what they would do is they go put all their dots on wherever they wanted. And if they had multiple features that they really thought were important, they would spread their dots out. If they thought one feature was the most important, they'd put all their dots on that one. So that's another way of doing it, voting. And then also Slack polls have been very powerful in a lot of my teams, or any type of, whether it's Teams or any other system that you're using that does virtual polling. And of course, right now, virtual polling is probably the most popular just because we're not together. So those are some tips for conflict management. We bake them into our working agreement. I also suggest to my students baking in some sort of way of dealing with conflict, especially if there's a choice to be made. So, all right, ceremonies across teams. What I did is I pulled out some of the ceremonies, most of which you probably are very familiar with. But what I want to do is highlight some of the things that I think are important within the ceremonies. So multi-sprint planning has been incredibly helpful, specifically for my current team. So my past teams, actually a lot of my past teams didn't do multi-sprint planning at all because they didn't really have a lot of dependencies on other teams. My team today has a lot of dependencies, both upstream and downstream. And so what we decided to do is, as a team, multiple teams would get together, very similar to an SOS. But what we do is we plan. So we plan together, and I'm sure you're very familiar with multi-sprint planning. We found it to be most effective, at least within my current team, is to do 3 sprints out. because 4 sprints for us was way too long, 2 sprints was too short. So we actually do 3 sprints out, which are helpful for us. However, every organization is different, but I think this is really important because it sets an expectation across all the dependency teams, and it avoids a lot of challenges that I've faced in the past, specifically around I'm dependent upon another team and I'm blocked. So we've had a lot less blockage because of this ceremony that we've had. And typically what we do is we get together, like I mentioned, it's every 3 sprints we plan out. In our environment, things change a little too much, so we can't go further than that. And any shorter than that is just not enough planning for us. And we basically plan out all of the work that we're going to do, and we do it actually by a story level and highlight any of the dependencies we have across the other teams. In our multi-sprint planning session, there are 8 Scrum teams that are all kind of intertwined. And this has helped us deal with keeping our team small, but at the same time being able to plan together. And then we also confirm alignment at the end of that ceremony. It's kind of ceremonious in a way where we kind of all do what we used to do, like a handshake, and now we do kind of more of just virtual handshake, but we do confirm the alignment to make sure that we're all in agreement, and then we publish that plan out. We do all of that actually through Jira, so we link up all of our stories are actually in Jira. That's the tool that we use, and we actually link up all the dependencies so you can track them all within the tool, and then we have a report that pulls out. All right, and Scrum of Scrums, I can't stress this one enough. This one I know you're familiar with, but I find the ones that are most helpful, actually, I started this when I was at eBay. We started a Scrum of Scrums. We had 5 teams that were all working. We didn't do a multi-sprint planning in that particular organization at the time. And I think actually looking back at it, and of course in retrospective, I think that would have been very helpful for those teams. But what we did do is a Scrum of Scrums. And what was happening in those teams is we had a lot of issues come in, and we had to triage them very quickly. What we ended up doing is leveraging our Scrum of Scrums for that. We actually met daily in that particular scenario because we had a product where we had lots of issues that came in. We had to triage them very quickly, and we had to get the right teams on them. In some cases, there were multiple teams, so we met every day. In my current organization with my current team, we actually meet weekly of our Scrum of Scrums. So we plan out our sprints, and because our work doesn't change as much as that team at eBay did, because our work is a little bit more consistent, can be planned for only a few sprints out, but it can be planned for. What we've decided to do is our Scrum of Scrums is really just weekly, and we do a touch base on did anything hit us that is going to impact our multi-sprint plan. If so, we discuss it, we highlight it, we adjust things as we need to, and then we move on. So it's a pretty quick meeting. So we typically meet for 15 minutes or less. And it's typically the project manager or Scrum Master and product manager, and usually an engineering lead, just in case there's questions in regards to engineering work. So those are the ceremonies across teams. There are lots of ceremonies within teams. The first and foremost, backlog grooming. I found this to be was one of those things that you're either doing really, really well and you can have all the work groomed out for a couple sprints out, or this is just really big struggle. The struggles that I've faced is when backlog grooming is combined with another meeting. That causes lots of conflict, and what ends up happening is we spend a lot of time talking about other things, but we actually don't groom. So having dedicated grooming sessions have been very helpful for all of my teams. My current team actually went over 2020. We decided as a part of our working agreement, we decided to go to, because we had so many different time zones, we had 4 different time zones that we were trying to deal with, and it was really conflicting. We decided to have one meeting every single day for 1 hour. That worked out for all time zones. What ended up happening is we had all of these ceremonies were all in the same time. So we didn't have a start and a stop till the ceremonies. And what ended up happening is things like backlog grooming got pushed out because we spent too much time working or talking about the actual work and actually the details of the work. So having dedicated time for this is really important. We've actually decided in our 2021 retrospective, looking back at 2020, that was one of the things that just didn't work for our team. We still have the same hour, but the days are different. So some of the days, because of the time zone, couldn't solve that one. Our team is still in 4 different time zones. What we could do is say, okay, on Thursdays is backlog grooming, and that's all we do on Thursdays. One of the challenges my team still faces, though, with backlog grooming is staying on topic, which is, do we have enough information in that story to actually implement? My team likes to really dive into the implementation, and that's something that we're still struggling with as a team. In my past organizations and my past teams, when we got really good at this, we were able to get anywhere from 2 to 3 sprints of stories groomed out, and it really allowed for very quick, fast implementations, very efficient. In addition, especially if you have UI designers that are trying to also keep ahead of the curve, it was really helpful for our designers to know what the story contains, so they had enough time to do any UI designing ahead of time. And we can plan accordingly for that as well. The one thing that I also wanted to call out is the importance of an epic grooming. A lot of product managers that I work with actually don't groom out the epic. That I found to be very helpful, especially in highly technical platform products, which is typically what I work on. The platform products, spending a little time on the epic. The epic really, I hone in on the business need, the business rationale, who's going to be working on it, who is our customer. And so I get kind of a high level view for our engineers, so they know like why they're doing this. And by the time we get to the stories, which is, as you probably know, or something that you can implement within 2 weeks, they're quite small. So having that context, that overall context, is very helpful. It's also allowed my teams in the past to be able to identify things that the product manager wouldn't necessarily know. Specifically any technical solutions that we want to explore. So by looking at the epic, the engineers, at least my engineers, have been able to identify areas that we might want to explore new technologies. And then we can bake that in, whether it's through a spike or an actual story or a POC, we can bake that into our epic and plan accordingly. So it really has given me a lot of better, basically looking at my product slightly differently and allowing my engineers to really help me identify what the best technology is. And we've come up with some really great ideas by just talking about the epic. And I feel like, at least with the teams that I work with and the product managers I've worked with in the past, they go straight to the stories because that's what the work is going to be, but they skip the epic. So I highly recommend talking about the epic. The other thing is, and this is kind of just my way of organization, my backlog. And this is a part of my working agreement, and this is something I've always suggested to all of my teams, is we don't actually size out a story until the team has signed off that it meets the definition of ready, meaning they have enough information that they can actually start and complete the story within a sprint. So when they believe the story is done and ready and they can actually start the work, that's at the point in which they size. So if you look at my backlog, which John knows, it's color coordinated, it's prioritized sequentially, both by epics and stories. So that's how I like to run my backlog. And one of the things I like to do is we can quickly look through anything that doesn't have story points or a size to it, means that it doesn't meet the definition of ready. And that's the way I grab those, because that's the ones I have to continue to groom. So just a little tip there for backlog grooming sessions. Stand-ups, I'm not going to talk too much about these. I think a lot of teams work on do stand-ups. And in a lot of cases, at least I've found in my experiences, they do stand-ups pretty well. One thing that I do want to highlight is when teams are either virtual, which right now they're all virtual, and multiple time zones. Multiple time zones has been a huge problem and a huge challenge for all of my teams. I can't remember the last time I actually had one team co-located in the same time zone. I've had so many different teams. I think it was about 15 years ago, the last time I had that experience. So it's very common that you're going to have virtual, of course, everyone has that now, but multiple time zones, it's very common. And it's challenging to deal with. A couple of things that my teams have had and tried in the past. Some worked, some didn't. And I think you really just have to understand and maybe try a few things within your teams. A couple of things that my teams have tried, specifically the time zones that were truly not able to get together. One of the teams I worked on, we had the time zones were very challenging. UK, Boston, California, so San Jose, as well as, let's see, where were we? Singapore and India. And there was no way we were gonna get that whole team together without someone being up at like 3 in the morning. So what we decided to do is that we were going to have daily stand-ups, but the daily stand-up was virtual, and we did it on a Slack channel. And basically when anyone woke up, they basically put out their daily stand-up. What did they do yesterday? What are they doing today? And if they had any blockers or concerns. So that's what we posted. And then what we also agreed to, and was the catch, and this is why it worked. If there were any blockers, we agreed as a team, we would literally pick up the phone and call at the first available moment that we could for the person that we needed within the time zone. So whenever it was a decent hour for me to call India, if I had a challenge and I needed my engineer who happened to be in India, then I would wait for the first available time that I could get with him where he's not sleeping. And then I would call him and we would discuss it. And that was the one way that actually worked. Otherwise, what happens is no one actually reads the Slack channel and no one's really paying attention, and the daily stand-up is defeated. So and the whole purpose of it is to really highlight any of the blockers or challenges, and then also to just make sure you're doing a touch base. That team worked really well. My current team tried that for about a week and we booted it. It did not work for the team I have now. Having a conversation works best for them. And in that team, multiple time zones, not as many challenges. We actually have Central Time, Pacific Time, and then we have India, so specifically STA time. So that's a little bit easier to work with. And we actually rotate hours. So every other sprint, we change when it's friendly. So it's either PST or US friendly time, or it's India friendly time. We just go back and forth. And that helps quite a bit actually, and keeps it nice for everyone. So demos. This is one of the things my team is struggling dealing with right now. My past teams, this could be a very, very important ceremony, and specifically just take a moment and celebrate the achievements that the team was able to accomplish. One of my favorite teams in my past, we did demos. We struggled in the beginning. Our stakeholders would come to our demos and they would basically tell us what they wanted to be done and differently. Wasn't really celebrating the work. So I put in a couple of rules. The first rule was you're not allowed to critique. And the second rule is you have to stand up and clap. So at the end of the demo, my stakeholders would all stand up, they started clapping, and we took a moment to celebrate. This is very important. Team morale, taking a moment to appreciate what you've done. We are running so fast, and this is where you get burnout. And just taking that moment and celebrating. So one of the things that I used in the past with the stakeholders, I didn't allow them to critique. I said, you are more than happy to talk to me afterwards about anything that you would like to see from an improvement standpoint. I want to hear those. I want to hear from my customers, but I don't want the demos to turn into this massive critique, because it was really turning the demos into not a demo, but a critique of, what more needs to be done. And that's a different conversation. So keeping it light, keeping it like celebratory is very important. I also think it's really important to be showcasing the technical designs and any type of spikes or work that the team has done. So one of my team members, this a couple companies ago, she was pretty much working a lot on the back end. And one of the biggest things that we needed for our team in order to move faster was to have automated testing, which we did not have. And what I asked her to do for a couple of sprints is to really focus on what that technical design would look like and build out a POC. At the end of that work, when she got the POC up and running, it was fantastic. And the ability for us to be able to run fast is important. So what I asked her to do is show it off in a demo. And she said that that would not be interesting to our stakeholders. Our stakeholders included, you know, the head of marketing, that we had several vice presidents in there. And she's like, it's super technical. It's really our process. She completely disagreed with demoing. I said, just try it out. If they don't like it or don't understand it, fine, whatever. So what I did is I said, but give me like a little intro. Let me just intro you and then you show off the demo. And so that's what we did. And at the end, it was absolutely amazing. First and foremost, we highlighted the importance of what this would allow us to do, specifically catching bugs, which was important to everyone. And then it also highlighted the technology that she was using. So she called out some of the technology she was using, some of the tools she was using that later ended up being used across the entire organization. So one of our VPs actually was so interested in it. He's like, all of our teams should be using this. So she got to then go and expand her horizons by going off and sharing off this this technology that she was using, and ended up actually leading that charge. So it was just one of those examples of it. My team thought it was too technical for our stakeholders. I said, no, let's demo it. I think it's really important. Even if they don't get it, understanding or at least knowing some of the complexities behind the scenes and setting the stage is really important. So, and then of course, celebrating all the hard work that she did. Retrospectives. This is the first ceremony that seems to always just disappear. I know that time is challenging, and we've spent a lot of time in meetings, but I can't stress the importance of what this can and cannot do to a team morale. So coming from a psychology background, this to me is really important. I see a lot of things since my studies in psychology. I see a lot more of the human side of things than I did before that degree. And that's one of the reasons why I went to get my psychology degree, is to understand human nature better, and specifically team dynamics. And this is something that I found to be very helpful and important that is almost always skipped, at least in the organizations that I've worked in. This seems to be one ceremony that just kind of magically disappears. I strongly recommend instilling this in whatever organization you have. We actually have just started at PayPal. We just started a retrospective within just the product managers. This is a very different, I didn't actually even think about doing this. It was my manager's idea. She basically gets the product managers together, and it's once a quarter, where we just retrospect on how our teams are doing, how we're doing, what works for us, what doesn't work for us. And it's been really nice. First of all, just to kind of vent and get things out, but second of all, to understand what other people might be going through too. So what my teams have found, my Scrum teams have found, is that they typically all are feeling the same thing, but they didn't know it because they didn't have a conversation around it. So this I cannot strongly recommend enough, specifically from a team morale standpoint, and to really bond your team. So some of the tips that I would strongly recommend in retrospectives is changing up the format. This is something that one of my former Scrum Masters did. Every time we had a retrospective, which is at the end of every sprint in that particular case, he had a completely different format. And there's lots of, actually, if you just Google retrospective formats, you'll get a ton of suggestions and great websites. If you want any suggestions, or if you can't find any, please feel free to email me. I've got about 3 or 4 links that are my favorites. Happy to share those off. But changing up the format can be helpful. Otherwise, it becomes kind of static, like you're just kind of going through the motions. But changing it up and leveraging the different retrospective formats can be helpful. And then the other thing, and this is what I find when I did some surveys on my past teams where the retrospective disappeared. I asked them in the survey why they didn't want a retrospective. And most of them came back with saying, you know what, we talk about it, but nothing happens. And I know that at least my current team was saying the same thing. My recommendation to specifically product managers and Scrum Masters, and project managers too, if you're in that role, I suggest that the team does a vote. So what you do is you come up with your retrospective and highlight the things that you want to improve as a team. Then you vote on 1 or 2 improvements. They can be very small and minor. put them in as user stories, put them in your backlog for the next sprint, and assign someone to take them on. This gave my past teams several things, actually. We benefited from the fact that we actually made improvements. We benefited from the fact that our retrospective wasn't the same thing every time. We were now talking about new things and new things that were coming up. And we kept improving as a team. The other thing is it allowed the team members to do something other than our standard work. So we could kind of venture off into other areas, and that includes our own processes. So this is just a recommendation I have with retrospectives. Otherwise, what you do find is every retrospective, you talk about the same thing and nothing changes, and you just keep rinse and repeating, which technically is the definition of insanity. So that is my suggestion. And also, if you put it on as a user story and assign someone to it, someone's held accountable for getting that done. And then also they get the time to do it. That was another thing that I got from the survey that I did on a couple of my teams, is they're like, we don't have time to make improvements. We just got to keep working. So this allows you to kind of carve out that time. All right, managing our work. This is kind of my favorite area. So, and John could probably speak to this with my roadmap, my product vision, and my backlog and my prioritization. So this one I want to talk about our roadmap, backlog, and prioritization. I'll talk a little bit about vision and roadmap. So first and foremost, the roadmap. So there should be a source of truth. This is something that I struggle with in my current organization, is that my roadmap gets copied into someone else's PowerPoint presentation and someone else's PowerPoint presentation and someone else's PowerPoint presentation. And the next thing you know, my roadmap has changed completely and I've got different due dates. So what I do is I make sure that there is a source of truth. And every time I share out my roadmap, I tell them where the source of truth is. And in my PowerPoint, which typically gets copied as the actual slide is copied and put into someone else's PowerPoint, I have in the slide the link to the source of truth. My source of truth for my current organization is in a Confluence page where I can change it when I need to. And that's one of the ways I communicate out, which I'll talk about a little bit in the next section. So in the, as a source of truth, and as you probably have in your own organizations, roadmaps change. And in my organization right now, it feels like things are changing about every other sprint. So I need to be very agile when it comes to my roadmap. So having a source of truth that I can edit and everyone can come and look at it and see the latest and greatest is the best way for me to organize this. This also allows me to not have to continuously build PowerPoints, which is a big challenge, especially in bigger organizations, at least my experience. And I don't want to continue to spend my time building out PowerPoints. So what I do is I built a website that I can just copy and paste into a PowerPoint, and I update that. And if anyone is looking for my latest and greatest roadmap, they can go straight there. On the roadmap source of truth, I also have my product vision. One of my, and I'm just going to kind of divert here for a second. I think it's really important as a part of the roadmap to also make sure that we're communicating out our product vision. So as a product manager, I don't just look at what we're working on in an epic or even a meta epic. I'm actually looking at what I want my product to look at 3 to 5 years from now. And that way kind of get some clarity. And what I do on my roadmap Confluence page is I actually have a video of my vision for my product. And basically what I do is I talk about what it would look like in 3 to 5 years from now, what my customer experience would be like. Just a quick video, it's about 5 minutes, and I've had almost 1,000 people look at it, which is really cool. And I put that out on my roadmap page because if anyone asks me, well, how my roadmap maps up to my vision, you can clearly see. You see that first and foremost, you see my vision presentation, and it's just, again, a video presentation, about 5 minutes. It's kind of like a little trailer, if you will. And then after that, I have a breakdown of kind of my vision statement, and then I have my roadmap. And you can see how that builds into it. So I think that's really important to have that source of truth. And also, I think a roadmap needs to change and evolve. And that's why I call it a rolling roadmap. So I also put disclaimers on my roadmap and just basically state, hey, if you come here and you look at this roadmap, it does change. And as we evolve and as we change and as our market changes, and in fintech, it seems to be changing quite a bit now. And has been lately. So, we need to be able to quickly change and and be agile with our roadmap. So having that source of truth and having a place where people can come and look at what the latest and greatest is important. Next, keep it updated. There are so many times I go and I look at someone's roadmap, and the last time it was changed was 12 months ago. So I typically look at my Confluence page about every other week. Typically when I'm looking at, or when the team is doing sprint planning, I'm looking at it just to kind of go through it. And if we're talking about any epics, or we're doing release planning, I'm making sure that that gets updated in real time. And then I like to open it up and review with my Scrum team. My team gets really bogged down in the details, and they're always like so focused on their work, which is great. That's one of the reasons why I love them so much. They're just really dedicated and really passionate. However, they don't take enough time to stop and step back. So one of the things I like to do, specifically in backlog grooming sessions, and from time to time, I will just pull up the roadmap and say, okay, here we are. Remember this journey, remember this vision, this is where we're at. And here's where we are in our roadmap, and here's what may have changed. And then as they groom out stories, and specifically as we groom out epics, and we start understanding how much time it's going to take to do the work, I like to update the roadmap, because a couple of things. One, I should never determine, as a product manager, I shouldn't be determining the time on how long it's going to take to do something. That's really my engineering team. So having them tell me, okay, look, this is going to take X amount of sprints, so we'll be able to, roll this out based off of the release plan in April. Okay, let me pull up my roadmap and let me move that to April, so they can see that what they're telling me is actually getting reflected in the roadmap. So it's another suggestion that I have. Backlog, my favorite. So keeping the backlog clean, some tips here. First and foremost, only have stories targeted for work in the next 3 to 6 months. One of my very hard learnings about my backlog when I first kind of started running a backlog was I had a lot of junk in there. And at one time it got up to over 500 stories within my backlog. And at one point you're just like, I don't even know what to do with this. Like, how do you sequentially prioritize that? It's not possible. And you can't keep it clean. So I determined that it was, for me anyway, in my world, it's about 3 to 6 months. If you're not going to work on a story within the next 3 to 6 months, you probably shouldn't even bother to write it, because the industry is going to change. So depending on your industry, and one of my industries, 3 months was almost too far out. In another one of my industries, I could have gone 6 to maybe even 8 months out. So kind of depending on what your organization is, what your product is, you may have flexibility, like you might want to flex here. But I strongly recommend asking yourself, like, how far can I plan out from a story level standpoint? And then don't go anything past that. And there's a lot of times I get stakeholders saying, hey, I would really love this feature. And I think, that's a great idea. Not going to happen in 2021. So not going to put it on my backlog, not going to groom it out with my team. However, there's a place for that, and I'll talk about that later. I don't think it should disappear. I just don't think it should sit on your backlog, because it may never get prioritized. And again, it's really hard to keep it sequentially prioritized, which is another thing I like to do. I like to have my backlog, both the epics sequentially prioritized amongst themselves, and then the stories sequentially prioritized. Stories, as well as bugs, as any type of task or work, is sequentially prioritized on my backlog. I think it's really important for a couple of reasons. One, I do like to take vacation from time to time, and I don't want my team to be held up on sprint planning if I'm not there. I want them to be able to proceed without me. So if the story's groomed and it's sequentially prioritized, they don't really need me there for the sprint planning. So my goal has always been to get 2 to 3 sprints of groomed stories out, sequentially prioritized, so they can just grab it from the top. The other thing that was helpful, several of my teams like to overcommit. So they take on too many stories within the same sprint, and they never complete the stories. So one of my teams, what I did is I said, look, all the work is sequentially prioritized in my backlog. So take the least amount of stories that you think you can complete. Once you complete those, then you take more. And what I found in that particular team, it's not all teams, but that particular team, what I found is there's actually motivation, and they did more work if they committed to less. It was a really strange human dynamic and group dynamic. They started competing. It was really interesting to watch that dynamic. I don't necessarily recommend that, but for that team, it worked well. And we saw much higher productive and efficient use of our team's time. So sequentially prioritize can be very helpful. Also keep it clean. Don't put a lot of stuff on there. That's not going to happen. And then also close work that's done or canceled. A lot of times I've seen teams not actually get work off their board, but it's been deprioritized. Get it off there. There's no reason for it to be on there. It's no reason you can't add it back on. So I always try to make sure that if the work has been canceled or deprioritized, we just remove it. And if you're using a system like Jira or Rally or something like that, you can cancel it and always, pull it back up if you decide that you want to reprioritize it. And then of course, close bugs when they are they're not being worked on. So one of the suggestions I have for product managers is if you get a bug, and let's just say it's a really low priority and it's just not going to be worth the effort to do. I have this quite a bit, and specifically in products that you might be doing a new version for, and that bug will cease to exist. I close it out with comments, and I think that's really important. Depending on your organization, my organization, whoever reported it, may be interested in knowing what happened to that. So having the comments or the notes on why, and then actually closing it, because at eBay specifically, I remember having inheriting a team and getting their bug list and thousands of bugs. When I worked on the view item page, we actually had thousands of bugs sitting in a Jira backlog. And what do you do with that? Like, it's just almost mind-numbing to think about how you clean that up. So what we did is we went through and highlighted anything that was the most important. Everything else we closed with notes to it. And then proceeded forward, because what we were doing with that at the time with that particular page is we were revamping it. So it didn't make a lot of sense to invest a lot of time on fixing something that we were just going to change the version of. So as we did that, we just went through that list and made sure that we've highlighted the most important things that were like P1s or P0s and got those fixed, and then dealt with the new version, and then obsoleted the rest. Okay, grooming frequency. This comes up a lot, by the way, in my current team and in some of my past teams as well. I find that at first I thought, actually, I tried about, well, it was about 6 years ago. I was grooming about once a week. So that gave me 2 grooming sessions before every sprint. What I've found since then is that it's more important to do it more frequently. So right now, the cadence that I'm running is basically 2 groomings every week, which seems to work best for my current team and the last team that I worked on as well. That allows our team to spend a lot more time on really understanding the requirements, understanding the concept and the customer's point of view. And then really making sure the stories are ready. What I've found in the past is if that grooming session isn't at a frequency that really works to be able to iterate on those stories or the epic, what ends up happening is the requirements really aren't understood. In a lot of cases, my engineers will say, yeah, I get it, I understand it, but they don't understand it to the level of actually implementation. So making sure that we're grooming frequently and allowing to make sure that all the engineers have at least heard the story, understood the story, and had time to ask questions. Okay, and I made a comment about wish list items. So things that come up in customer conversations or in maybe your stakeholder conversations of, hey, that's a really great idea, but I know it's not going to happen here in the next 3 to 6 months. So I'm not going to put it on my backlog, but I should put it somewhere. I always have a running wish list, and I usually sequentially prioritize that as well. And basically what I do is I put down some basics, who actually told me about the idea, what the idea was about, what was the benefit. And I actually have a separate Jira backlog for wish list items. And I sequentially prioritize that. And anytime something new comes in, I throw it on that wish list. What I do then with the wish list is about every quarter, sometimes every other month or so, I will look at that wish list and just kind of see, is there anything I want to bring in? When I was working at eBay, when we were doing annual planning, it was like the best way to go and get some great ideas. So over the year, I would capture all of these ideas and I would have them sequentially prioritized. And anytime I added more stuff to that wish list, I would prioritize that as well. And then what would happen is when we were getting ready for planning, I just looked at the top of the list you know, look, those are great ideas. Like that's what we should tackle. And what was great, and specifically in my role at eBay, is we had a lot of stakeholders with lots of, I would say, very passionate and wanted their wish list items at the top. And what was cool about having this running wish list is I actually had conversations in my stakeholder meetings, which I typically ran every month, is we would talk about that wish list. I'd pull it up and say, hey, here's some new ideas that I've added to the wish list. Here's where we prioritized. You know, what do you guys think? Do you think that's beneficial to the company? Do you think it's not? And we actually had a stakeholder conversation. So by the time we got to planning, we just grabbed the top items. So whatever we got from a resource standpoint, we just drew the line. This is how much we can complete. And so it was kind of like basically your backlog for your planning. It worked really well. I'm actually currently doing that now, and it's working well in my PayPal role as well. Prioritization. Okay, this is really tough. If you're a product manager and have to do this, this is really tough. I have some suggestions. There is no silver bullet, just like any of these things. There's no silver bullet. You kind of have to see what works best for you. Try some things out, and if it doesn't work, try something new. So prioritization. I strongly recommend sequentially, and I've said that multiple times. And what I mean by that really is, I don't know if you've been in an organization. I know that I have been in several where they say P1, P2, P3, P4, so priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, priority 4. When you bucket it that way, basically what happens is everything is priorities. So you have everything as P1s. So what do you work on first? So that's why I say sequentially so much, is that it's really important to say what's number 1, what's number 2, what's number 3, what's number 4. You can't have 2 ones. You need to know what you do first. So that, I think, is the kind of a basic fundamental that helps for a variety of reasons, but then you don't have that huge bucket of P1s that there's no way you can accomplish, even if you got all the resources in the entire organization within a year for a year. There's no way you're going to do everything. You really have to think through what is the most important. And that's where it becomes challenging, because the most important is really hard, because prioritization isn't just saying, oh, this is the most important for my customer. Well, what about your company? What about your stakeholders? What about your team? What about efficiencies? Or, you know, maybe there's a security issue. What if there's 3 security issues? How do you really prioritize? One of the things that, you know, agile practices will highlight, and specifically in Scrum, highlights this notion of business value. But I have yet to, or at least in my experience, I have not found a really good tool to help me with that. So I actually created my own business value calculation. I'm very quantitative. I'm qualitative as well, but I do like numbers, and I like it when I have a calculation. I can just plug it in, and I can tell myself, where is this in sequential priority order? So I came up with a calculation. I think it's been about 10 years, maybe even 12 now. I came up with this business value calculation. I'm sharing it off with you. My only ask is, if you do use it, that you give me a little credit. So a little citing would be awesome. But I am sharing it off, so you're welcome to use it. And I'm going to show you on the next slide how to use it and what it's all about. And you can grab this from my website. So if you don't capture it here, don't worry about it. There's more details on my website. You can just go there. So that was very helpful, that having that calculation where I can just plug in numbers, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. But you can just plug in numbers and it comes out with this magical number, and it tells you what the business value is. That was helpful for me, especially when you're prioritizing across the board. And then if you're a product manager and you have to defend your prioritization, which seems to be every day for me, this was a very easy tool for me to say, okay, here's how I calculated it. Why do you think the feature is more important? And I ended up having a lot of interesting conversations with stakeholders, and this is why I've spent several times iterating on my business value calculation, is I listened to what they had to say and why they thought one feature was more important than the other when I said the opposite. So I've kind of tweaked it a little bit over the years, and it's actually been quite helpful, and it helps me defend my prioritization as well, because I want to make sure I think through all the different areas of prioritization, because it's not just a matter of this is more important than that. You actually have to think of different lenses to coming up with that sequential order. The next thing that I've used actually is a tool that I've used. It's called Buy a Feature. I don't know if you guys have ever played the game Buy a Feature. It's an absolutely fantastic game. I got it off the internet with one of the agile organizations. It's actually fantastic. I kind of modified it a little bit. I was working at a smaller company. It's fairly small, about 250 people. However, one of the challenges that I faced was the stakeholders. Very strong, passionate individuals, always screaming that their feature was more important than the other. And I had a lot of conflict specifically between legal as well as marketing and customer service. So what I decided to do is find some sort of tool or exercise that we could do to really understand what features we should go after. At the time I was tasked, my team was tasked with actually basically redoing one of their core products from the ground up. So I needed to identify what was the most important feature of this product that had been developed over 10 years, that had lived out there for a decade with our customers, and we have to replace it. What's the most important feature? Well, no matter which stakeholder I talked to, they said something different. So what I decided to do is that we would play this game, and I had my team basically groom out and size all of the epics. And I put epics basically on paper, and I put them all across the room. And I invited my stakeholders to the room. And because my marketing team really liked to, the way they would argue their cases, they brought literally their whole team to the meeting, and they would scream and rant and rave very loudly. And what I decided to do is say, okay, well, every department has a single seat at the table. I don't care who you bring, just one person per team has a say and will participate in this activity. So that way it's equal and fair across all of the departments. So if marketing wants to bring 5 people, that's cool. They only have one seat at the table. You tell me who you want at the table, and that's who will sit there. And then the only department that I actually granted more than one seat was customer support. And the reason why is they listen to the customers day in and day out, and they would know what the biggest pain is. So I gave them 2 seats. Every seat at the table got X amount of dollars. And I actually printed out like little fake money, and they got money. Each dollar represented a story point. And all of the features on the board or on the walls had points next to them. So how much it cost per feature. And what I asked these stakeholders to do is take their money and go buy a feature. What was interesting about this exercise is that none of the stakeholders could buy a single feature on their own. So they actually were forced to have a conversation amongst themselves and talk through what was the most important feature, not for their department, but for the company. It was the most fascinating exercise I've ever done. And watching them talk, my designer and I kind of sat, we facilitated the meeting and the exercise, and we basically sat in the corner and we just watched and listened to the conversations. They were fascinating conversations where marketing and legal were debating on what was the most important feature, and several other departments as well. And it was interesting for them to get out of their domain and their silo and really talk about what was best for our customers. It was a great exercise. I highly recommend it. If you have never tried it before, you can just Google it and you'll get to the organization site that has all the rules. Again, I modified it a little bit with fake money and story points and features on the board, but it was very highly effective, especially if you've got a whole bunch of stakeholders that participate in prioritization of the work. Okay, next is definition of ready. So this is basically what I asked my team to do is tell me exactly what you need before we can mark a story as ready, and you can actually size it out. I recommend actually writing this down and then pulling it up when you're doing your backlog grooming sessions. So you can make sure you've checked all the checkboxes and it is truly ready. So if you need UI design, if you need data, if you need to highlight any dependencies, but I strongly recommend that. And then I also recommend that teams do not pull in any story that doesn't meet that definition. And that includes if anyone writes stories to your backlog. So I actually have a couple of teams that do put work on our backlog that I prioritize. And I don't want to discourage that, because it's good information. It's helpful for our team to hear those new stories, but they have to meet that definition of ready. All right, epics and stories. All right, so this is, I mentioned grooming and grooming often and regularly. I also highlighted the grooming of epics as well, primarily for that context, so the team can start at the top and work their way down. And then I highlighted just a second ago that stories should not really be worked on until they've met that ready. definition. Okay, prototyping, lots of great tools. I'm actually doing 3 prototypes right now with usability studies in my current world. Lots of prototyping tools. There are 2 kind of avenues that I've taken. One is prototyping with an actual working prototype, meaning I have an engineer that I'm working with on my team that actually helps build out the prototype as we go. The other area or prototyping direction you can go is with leveraging a prototyping tool, whether that's paper prototyping and actually drawing it out, or there's prototyping tools. The one I like for my current role is called Just in Mind. Great tool, easy to use, great UI interface for myself that I can build out the tool. I can post it in on the cloud, and I can share off that URL to my stakeholders and my customers. And then I can have my customers come into a usability study, click through it. I also use this in my, my classroom when I'm teaching usability studies. So can't recommend this enough to do prototyping, especially if you've got a world. I've got a world right now where I don't have a UI designer. I currently build the pricing platform, and we build UI experiences for internal users. Because they're internal users, I just am not going to get the design resources that I would love to have. So I design myself. I'm not a very good designer. I've learned a lot of great tips and tricks from the designers I've worked with in the past. So prototyping actually has helped me quite a bit to build a better user experience without having design resources. Releases, I'm not going to talk too much about this. Release management typically does not fall within product management, is usually in project management, program management, or Scrum Master roles. But I do want to highlight the importance of making sure that you're tying all the work together. So one of the things I like to do is all of the stories, if your stories are well groomed, and you've got details in it, and you have your epics well groomed, you don't really have to do much product documentation or release documentation. One of my past teams actually had everything in Jira, and we would actually pull the release notes directly from Jira. So we didn't have to actually do any release notes at all. We just downloaded it from Jira, and it provided all of the content that was in the epics and the stories. And again, if that's groomed out well, then it really saves you a lot of time for release documentation later. And then also making sure that we kept up with linking and making sure that we highlight which stories are in which releases and bugs as well. That's helped me to do a lot of communication out. So leveraging the tools, specifically, I mentioned Jira quite a bit. I use it to the nth degree, where I can get release notes. I can share off dashboards with different stakeholders. So I don't have to, I'm kind of lazy when it comes to documentation. I want to have good documentation, but I don't want to spend a lot of time re-documenting. So I want to document it once, and I want to pull it into various communication methods. So I highly recommend leveraging any type of tools that you have to get those kind of release notes. If you keep them up to date, whether it's Jira ticket with a fixed version on it, which is the release, in Jira, then you can easily pull down those type of release notes and publish that out. All right, measuring how we work and what we do. So first and foremost, I want to highlight some reasons to measure. I think sometimes we skip this part of our world. It is important to understand delivering that value of to the company. If you have a business value calculation, like what I'll share with you here in a minute, you have the ability then to easily calculate what your value is that you provided. It is relative. So the way the business value calculation works that I use is relative sizing, very similar to using story points, but you're doing it by business value and not effort of work. So having that number, and you can actually, in one of my past teams, I put them in a field in Jira, and we could just calculate it. So it calculated within the release notes. So it showed you X amount of value and X amount of points, and we could compare those. So it was really nice and very well organized to understand what the business value is that we delivered. And as my team, so, you know, for example, your story points could be really high, but your business value is really low, then maybe it's something you don't want to be working on. So you can kind of get some, you know, ROI going on with your stories. And then working smarter, working faster. So especially in this world where we're working virtually, it's really hard to balance work life. At least I have a challenge, and my team has challenges working work-life balance. Trying to work smarter is really important. So that's one of the reasons we may want to measure. And then also, what is the perception of our work, both internally and externally? So those are some reasons you might want to measure. The measurements that my team uses and my past teams have used, business value, which I've talked about, effort, so your story points, and then so effort, amount of work. So between business value and effort, you can get your ROI. There are happiness scores that I like to use with my customers and my team. And this is something that I would definitely encourage doing. So coming up with an NPS score for your customers and understanding what their happiness level is by looking at an NPS score, asking them how likely are you to recommend this product to a colleague or a friend. That is really helpful to have that. For my customers right now, all my customers are internal, so it's easy for me to send out such a survey. We currently send out the survey every quarter to my internal customers. In my past life, to my external customers, depended on the particular industry and the type of customer, whether it's B2B or B2C. But we always like to get a gauge, usually quarterly, sometimes more frequently. And then velocity, so how many story points your team delivers within a sprint or a month, or however the time period is that you calculate. This is, at least for my current team, I think we underestimate this and the importance of this is to really see how much throughput we have, what's our outcome. We've had some challenges in 2020, and it really impacted our velocity. And looking at the numbers really helped us understand that, hey, the team really is struggling and we need help. So velocity is important to be tracking. And then team happiness, which I mentioned, and customer happiness, but as an NPS score for your team. I like to do this about once a month to kind of gauge how the team's morale is doing, how the team is feeling to work on the team. And the question that I ask is, how likely are you to recommend a colleague or a friend to work on our team? And I typically do this at a Scrum team level, but my manager has recently started to use it as a higher level. So across all of our pricing Scrum teams, and kind of looking at, how is everyone feeling? So not just within my Scrum team, but across multiple Scrum teams and across our entire organization. So you can use this at an organizational level as well. All right, my business value calculation, and I'm almost done. So my business value calculation, again, it's on my website. You're welcome to take it and try to use it on your own. I'd love to hear feedback too. If it worked for you, I'd love to hear some success stories. My only ask is that you cite me. So coming from the academic world, citations, I would love a cite. So with that, I look at multiple dimensions. So as I mentioned, value is really hard to calculate. So I look at it from 3 different levels, and I color coded. When you see the actual equation, you'll understand the color coding. But first I wanted to tell you the dimensions that I look at. First is what you can implement successfully and sustainably. This is really important because you don't want to tackle anything that you can't actually implement successfully. You want to be able to execute and be able to deliver that value. If you can't do it successfully, then you're not going to deliver any value. So I'll talk about the measurements that I use within that in a minute. And then what are your customers want and what they're willing to pay for? In one of my smaller startups that I worked at, we were very good at delivering what the customer wanted, but not necessarily what the customer is willing to pay for. And that reflected, unfortunately, in our sales, in our revenue. So that's important distinction, is not just what they want, but what they're willing to pay for. And then also because I work on an internal product right now, I actually ask my customers if they would pay for this. If this is an external and they were buying this as a service, would they pay for it? So you can still use it as if you're working on something internally, an internal platform. And then also, what is your team excited about creating? This is really important in regards to the morale of your team, but also the quality of delivery. So doesn't mean that it has to be like super exciting and sexy of a new product, but just something that they're excited about taking on. So the actual equation, this is the equation. And for every single element that I pull into the equation, I weight it. This weight has been dramatically different by all the organizations that I've used this in. And I want to say it's been 6 or 7 organizations that I've used this in now. It's been a while. Such keeping track. But I first look at, and in every single measurement, this is what I use, the Fibonacci-like numbers. So very similar to story pointing, relative sizing, so it's very quick. And basically what I would do is I go through every single story and I ask myself, what's the implementation risk? How hard is it to implement? What's the global impact? So is it regional, but it doesn't impact globally? So if you're working on a global product, this is really important. I had a lot of times where, we had this, I don't know, France, wanted one feature, but it wasn't really impactful globally. So no one else wanted it globally, but, our French team did. So that would get a lower score. So basically you do a Fibonacci-like numbers. So if it's a regional only, I would give that maybe a 1 or a 0. And so it's 0 points basically, and you multiply it by your weight percentage. And again, on my website it has more details, and I actually walk you through how to calculate it. So if you're interested. And then I also look for, what customers want and are willing to pay for. I look at company priority because that's kind of baked in there. And then I look at customer impact, revenue and cost savings. And then for what your team is excited about, I look at how is it innovative? Is that something new and new technology that we're taking on? And then also team effectiveness. I define each one of these terms and all of the weights and how to calculate this on my website. So again, more details out there if you are interested in trying it out. And again, if you do, I'd love to hear back from you on if it was effective for you or if you had to tweak it in some way. And last but not least is communicating out. I'm just going to focus on dashboards and wikis. I mentioned that I'm kind of, in general, lazy about documentation. When I say lazy about documentation, I just don't want to repeat it. So I want to have one place where it's a source of truth and we can pull from it. For my current team and my past teams, I typically use whatever tool we're using for story writing. In my current world, it's Jira. And I literally pull everything from Jira, whether it's release management, documentation, it's roadmaps, and I actually create different dashboards for different users. So right now I've got, 5 different groups of stakeholders. They each want to see something slightly differently. So I've created Jira dashboards for each one of them so they can see the information that's interesting to them, but not necessarily to all of the groups. And then I basically allow the Jiras to fill right into there, and then they can see kind of their slice of the pie and what they're most interested in. So I strongly suggest leveraging those tools to reduce the redundancy, because otherwise you end up spending all your time doing documentation. And then anything you can do providing self-serve, Confluence, wiki pages, websites, anything you can do to allow people to go find the information for themselves. And then market that. That was the biggest catch for me, is make sure people know. So when I'm out of the office, I actually put it in my out of office tooltip. So, hey, I'm not in the office, but go check out my website. So it's been very helpful for me to reduce the redundancy, and that helps me spend more of my time with my customers and doing prototyping and usability studies, and less time documenting for different various teams within my organization. And with that, I'm going to pause for any questions.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Nicole. So the floor is open, and I immediately see something in the question room. Okay, ready? This is from one of our participants. Okay, I work in fintech, software as a service. Our customer is financial advisors. One of my team's objectives is to reduce churn by resolving bugs and improving PX. Actually, in 20 years, I've never heard of PX. I assume it's performance. Do you have any suggestions on measuring PX improvements, or how to call out impacts our team made toward reducing churn? We're finding that measuring our efforts toward churn reduction is difficult to measure when teams like customer success have churn reduction initiatives as well. Who's making what impact? Oh, product experience is PX. Okay, so measuring product experience improvements and how to call out impacts made to reduce churn. That's the question.
Okay. Is the churn internal churn, like employee churn or customer churn?
Looks like I can't tell from the question. Revenue. Oh, revenue churn. Okay.
Oh, revenue stream. Okay, so the question is to some suggestions around measuring basically releases to to customer experience. So changes in customer experience.
That's what it sounds like. Yeah, is tying that to, I guess, the business value that you hinted at and reducing.
Yeah. So yeah, there's two ways to do that, actually, at least that I think of. First is predicting what it could impact, and that's really the business value calculation that I mentioned. And then the other one, which I think this is actually targeting, is after you've released it. So a lot of time, at least in my past experience, we spend a lot of time in measurement of the customer experience. So when we roll out a new feature, we typically add some sort of measurement and tracking to that. So we can track how many people clicked on it, if there's any revenue associated to that. So for example, I'm just thinking about the eBay's view item page. Everything on that page is pretty much tracked. So depending on what user experience you have, like tools, if you have like a UI, I would strongly recommend maybe even trying out an A/B test. So you've got some customers going through one and some customers going through the other experience, and then measure and compare. I did that also at eHealth. One of the biggest challenges we had is that we wanted to revise our websites for Medicare. So 65 and plus was my customer base. Operate very differently on the internet. And we made a change and rolled it out, and it was horribly unsuccessful, where we saw the clicks drop down significantly. And so we had to test our way into that. And so the way we did that is we implemented an A/B test, and we slowly changed things. So we took one feature at a time, and as we rolled out, we would test and look at the two tracks, the control and the test. So hopefully that answered the question. Happy to talk more about that. It's a very interesting topic. But I'm assuming it was not the predicting, which is what the business value calculation does. And of course, you can take real information and feed that into your business calculation to make sure that you are measuring right. So one of the things that I like, in the current system I have, because it's an internal tool, they have to use it. So I don't have this as much as I did in the eBay experience that I owned. But in the eBay experience, when I owned that, where it was consumer facing, I compared my business value to what revenue we tracked from that feature being released. And then so I could compare, does my business value hold true? So hopefully that answers the question. But again, happy to.
And if the follow-up on this is if customer success have churn reduction initiatives as well as you do, can you tell who's making which impact?
Oh, that one's a tough one. Okay, so now you're talking about multivariate testing. So yes, you can. It's much more difficult to track, but yes, you can. And there's a lot of tools out there that allow you to track that multivariant. So I would suggest exploring some, and of course I don't know the company or the details of the situation, but you can actually track that through multivariate testing. So I would suggest looking into that in more detail. And again, happy to. Okay. These are fun questions. These are fun questions. I love testing and I love measurements, so I could go on for hours about that.
Yeah, the questioner says they're trying to see if resolving bugs, for example, is impacting users from canceling their subscriptions, or if it's really just better account management from relationship managers.
Oh, that one's a good one. That one's a really good one. Yeah. And what you'd have to track, though, is what the customer relationships or the account managers are doing. And you'd have to be tracking when that is happening, when their efforts are happening, and then when those bug fixes are happening. And then you can track and look at the subscriptions and retention of those customers. So yeah, that's an interesting case, and you're going to have fun with that. We did that at when I was working at YouSendIt. We had a cloud-based storage service, and that's something that we tracked as well. Is we didn't track our customer service, so we talked about it, specifically the account management side of the house with our B2B customers. And we looked at, as we released bug fixes, and we bucketed them together, so we knew it. We didn't necessarily know what specific bug fix, but we did know if the release itself helped. So we bucketed those in releases. Yeah.
It's all in putting containers around the timing of things, so you can differentiate what, and being quick with your metrics.
Absolutely.
having real-time dashboard if you could. But yeah, it is tricky. That's a great question.
Yeah. And it's not an easy solve. I wish you the best of luck with that one. But keeping track of what's being released when, or what the account managers are doing when, and anything you could do to get that real life real-time dashboard will be very helpful. So you can start seeing, and we did that a lot at YouSendIt, where we would actually look at where we had dips in subscriptions. And then of course your subscription model too. Is it a subscription monthly, weekly, annually? And then that plays a role into it too. It's a little bit more complex. Definitely something you can do.
Awesome. Okay, another question. Any advice for product managers who are not technical but interface with engineers regularly?
That's such a great question. A lot of my mentees ask that question who didn't come from technical backgrounds. Maybe they came from marketing or even customer support. Yeah, so the best recommendation I have, first and foremost, if there's anything that you can do to kind of dive in to the technology and understand it, one of the suggestions I have, and I know this might sound strange and it is time consuming, but I actually spend a ton of time. Now I come from an engineering background, so it's a little easier for me. So I have to put my hat on of someone who might not be so technical. But one of the things I do recommend to my mentees is to go to any of the technical design conversations. So a lot of times engineering teams will go off from the stories after you've groomed them out with them. They'll go off and start talking about the technical design, the architecture. Go to those meetings, listen. You'll start picking up very quickly. Again, it does take some time and it will consume some of your time. So you might not be able to make every meeting, but I do recommend going and listening to your engineers. One of my engineers said to me the other day, actually, I actually laughed at him and he laughed back. He said, "I don't think you want to be there. It's going to be technical." I go, "Really?" Like, really? Yes, I want to be there. It'll be amazing how much you actually do absorb. I find a lot of my mentees in the product management world, especially who are non-technical, they actually pick up a lot more if they attend. If they don't, they're just not going to pick it up. And even if you and watch, ask them to draw. My engineers love whiteboarding. That's something that I do really miss in the office world. But we do it virtually now, so they'll draw on the screen so we can see a drawing, and I just have them draw it out. It can be very educational for you, and hopefully that'll help bring you up to the technical speed without necessarily attending technical classes. So sometimes you don't know how that relates. But as a product manager, if you know your product's experience very well and you sit into a couple of the technical design and architecture conversations and just listen to your architect, listen to your engineers, and QA. If you have quality assurance engineers, I cannot strongly recommend enough. One of the best times I ever had was when my Scrum team, we actually just got out of Scrum training and we were brand new to the Scrum world, and our consultants really highly recommended that if we had the time to jump in on any task, even if we didn't understand it. Well, I actually jumped in and wrote code for my team. I had no idea what I was doing. I hadn't coded in a decade, but I jumped in, I tried out a task, and I actually got really good at it. Too good, I think, because then they wanted me to start coding. But I do recommend anytime you can maybe sit down and shadow, as well as sitting in on those technical conversations. You'll pick up pretty quickly because you know your product.
Awesome. All right, there are no questions in the queue, but just real quick. So takeaways from you, Nicole, from this talk were, I've got to check out Just in Mind as a tool, as a prototyping tool. Never heard of it. I've heard of Balsamiq and a couple others, but not that one. I love how you said close out bugs with comments, because Jira tickets, we use Jira as well at eBay, as you know, and those tickets linger, right? Yeah. And last months and years. So it's always good to, as archaeology, to know like what happened with it. So I'm so glad you're an advocate for closing out bugs with comments. I also like keeping a source of truth on a living document on Confluence, which some people call Wiki. So basically an editable web page. I think it's a smart idea. I don't think enough of us do that. And of course, your business value calculations. You're very curious to try those out, especially when there's a production bug that comes in that impacts. Because I work on the marketing team at eBay, marketing technology specifically. So if we have something that comes in, I always want to know like what was the business impact, Like how many emails didn't get sent, for example, or how many text messages could we do because of this infrastructure failure or whatever it might be. So those are my takeaways. Again, I assume that we can have your permission to post the slides on what will now be the past events page on PMSIG. Are you cool with us having those?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And I see your contact info, so thank you very much. I know it was an earlier slide as well. Let me just check the queue real quick. Oh, something did come in. Okay, so last question. How do you partner with customer care to quote delete unquote the bug backlog? They tend to hoard bugs, so this person has convinced the team to delete them if they're over 2 years old and have less than 2 customers reported incidents. So what's your rubric, or do you have one for like that bug backlog?
So I'm just thinking back to where I had a passionate customer support team that didn't want any bugs closed unless they were actually fixed. I actually spent a lot of time with the team educating them on the ROI, basically. And if it's one customer and, we're not hearing it a lot, or it's just not a feature that we want to build out, or I would sit down and basically educate the customer support team. In that particular organization, what I did is, actually, I did this with eBay too, now I think about it, because I went out several times to Salt Lake City, spent time educating the customer support staff on, here's what we're looking for, here's at what point we'll actually invest. We would love to solve every possible bug, but there's no way to keep up with technology if you're going to actually make it perfect. My professors, because I'm a perfectionist, my professors like to tell me that perfection is insanity. And that keeps me honest, because it's true. Perfection can't be reached. So what I typically do with my customer support teams are spend a little time with them to educate them in my world. And then also spend a lot of time with them in their world. At eBay, we actually listen to a lot of calls. At You Send It, I actually did weekly I did coffee chats where they just came and I educated them on something what was new and interesting. And I also updated them on any bugs. And then give them a perspective, kind of relatively, specifically with the customer support agents that I've worked with. They're very passionate about supporting their customer and having the customer voice, which is really important. And as a product manager, you want to hear every single thing that they hear. So they're really a great partner. But being able to then explain to them how you do these prioritizations is very important. And of course, when they see the bigger backlog of bugs and understand, well, here are the ones that I take, and this is why, here are the ones I just don't have the bandwidth to solve. That helps quite a bit.
Great. So final advice for an engineer willing to transition to a product manager role? We'll close with that one.
Actually, I have a mentee that's done that, and she's really struggled. The biggest challenge for her, I don't know your situation, the biggest challenge for her was the interpersonal skills, and the notion that you are truly in a leadership role without any direct reports, and in all honesty, with very little authority. So I got all the responsibility. So I strongly recommend at least beefing up on some skills around leadership. My leadership style is very much servant leadership. So understanding kind of, how you want to present yourself or brand yourself as a leader is very important, because you will be in a leadership role. And that was a big challenge for her in learning those interpersonal skills and dealing with, people that might not be as easy to work with as engineering's my mentee says that engineering was a really easy role for her. It's really more difficult as a product manager because you're juggling so many different areas and disciplines, and you're no longer in that little bubble of just coding. You're now in this world of trying to orchestrate. You're really much an orchestrator of your entire product and everyone who cares about your product. So that's my suggestion is look at your interpersonal skills, do some skill assessments, look at your leadership style. There's lots of great assessments out there that you can do and kind of understand what your leadership style is, and read up on different leadership styles as well, because as I've found over the years is that the best leaders are the ones that can change their style and morph as the team needs. So.
Very good. Awesome.
And best of luck.
Yeah, exactly. That too. All right, Joe, final thoughts?
No, I thought that was a great talk. Thank you so much, Nicole. Just to add one more thing to your takeaways, John, I thought this was a gem, so I wrote it down. And that was something maybe we could all embrace, but it's accomplish more when you commit to less.
Yeah,
So
I was
pitch
shocked
3 to
by that
5.
one, by the way. But my
Yeah.
team did. They loved it.
Sequential prioritization, man. And you knock them off the list and you add a new one.
Yeah. And the team had such a great feeling of accomplishment because
Yeah.
you feel very deflated and defeated if you weren't able to complete all your stories in a sprint. And that particular team, I remember we just felt so deflated. We never completed all of our stories. So I said, let's just take half, like half the story points. Let's start there. Get a win.
Exactly.
And then you can
And celebrate those accomplishments too, for sure.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Nicole. Good call out, Joe. Yeah, awesome, Nicole. Thank you for all the resources and your availability. And I'm sure a lot of us will look forward to the recording. We can do kind of a deeper dive or pause and communicate with you on these channels. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
And like I said, I can talk about this all day long. So if you want to do a coffee chat, just let me know.
All right.
Thank you for everybody for joining, and thank you, John, again, as always, for being the host of this. This is really a cool event.
My pleasure. Okay. Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming. We'll see you in April for the next PMSIG.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
Bye.